everyone, and welcome to Rock M Radio. I'm here with my partner in crime on the beat this season, Quentin Corpuel. Say hello, my friend.
Hello. Good to be back, Adeen.
Yeah, it is great. I am super excited for this new season, new opportunities for not just us, but Mizzou Football, going from the hunters to the hunted, you would have to say. A lot of teams going to be circling that game on their schedule as opposed to us circling games on our schedule. While there are a fair share of the games to do that there. Quentin has been here in Como since the beginning of August, and he's been following along with fall camp. I just arrived in Como after a 10-hour drive about 2 days ago. So Quentin is our guy here when it comes to knowing what there is to know about fall camp. First things first, before we get started on this, I would like to let you guys, the viewers and the listeners at home, that Rock M has the Rock M magazine, the Mizzou Football Preview magazine. We have just about every information you can need on any player, any newcomer on the Mizzou football team, and every team that we are playing on the schedule this year. There's plenty of data in there that's gone in with a lot of work, a lot of top-tier journalism being showed there. The link to buy that is in the bio. It's going to be $15 retail price. It's going to be $10 for Rock M monthly subscribers, and it's going to be $5 for Rock M yearly subscribers. So, Quentin, let's get started here. Let's just go moving on swiftly. One thing that a lot of people, I'm assuming, are wanting to know about from what you've seen fall camp, what are some of the updates you would have on the key positional battles this season? Obviously, the running back position being really heavily looked at with the absence of Cody Schrader and a lot of newcomers coming in, and also the offensive line position, lots of new faces there.
Yeah, that was one of the main things I and likely a lot of the other beat writers were looking for throughout fall camp is clarity on the unknown. And while there are a lot of veterans, there are a lot of givens this season. Brady Cook's the starting quarterback. The wide receiver depth chart seems to be in order. There were a lot of unknowns, especially on the defensive side of the ball. I'll start on offense because, as you said, the running back and offensive line position groups were relatively unknown coming in. I think running back was more certain than offensive line. It's going to be Nate Noel and Marcus Carroll as the top two guys. And then behind them, it's going to be Jamal Roberts, DeForest Jones, and Kewan Lacey. As to who has separated themselves between the two of Noel and Carroll, Nate Noel has gotten more first-team reps, and I would say he will most likely be the RB1. Now, I think Marcus Carroll, especially considering his play style, he's more of the bruiser. He's more of the downhill back. He's more of the physical guy. There's a chance that he might have been held out of scrimmages, being only given 5 carries in the scrimmage the other day, just to conserve him. But Nate Noel has really impressed in camp thus far, and I would not be surprised if he's taken the RB1 reps to start the season, at least against Murray State. As for offensive line, I was very curious to see how that would shake out, especially considering that it looked like when Caden Green transferred here from Oklahoma a little while ago that he was going to get the left tackle position. But then Mizzou, it turned out weren't done big game hunting in the transfer portal and got Marcus Bryant from SMU, who had played over 2,000 collegiate snaps at left tackle. And it was honestly what I thought it was going to be in terms of left to right. It looks like after fall camp, I can say with a good bit of certainty that it's going to be Marcus Bryant at left tackle, Caden Green at left guard, which he played at Oklahoma last season, Connor Tollison at center, Cameron Johnson at right guard, and Armand Membu at right tackle. And there were a lot of different combinations I could foresee, especially considering that I believe Cameron Johnson was an offensive player at left guard for Houston when he was there. Armand Membu is a versatile offensive lineman. There were questions, I was considering that Marcus Bryant might play on the interior, and that Caden Green could kick out to left tackle. Basically, there were a lot of different ways this could have gone, but it looks like the first 5 is set. In terms of backups, I believe Javin Richardson will be the backup left tackle for now. Eli Drinkwitz in a press conference the other day said that the position battle isn't necessarily over yet. But if I were to project, I believe it's going to be Marcus Bryant starting out there at left tackle. And then you'll see guys like Drake Heismeyer at center, Logan Reichert on the interior. They have quality backup offensive linemen as well, and especially in the trenches in a league that is built, whose foundation lays in the trenches, that's going to be very important. And so I think we have a lot more clarity on those two position groups than we did at the start of camp.
That is, I mean, amazing to hear. Nate Noel is a guy that I said to a lot of people that I know were like, it's Marcus Carroll's job to lose. But I was telling him, Nate Noel is the kind of back that Drinkwitz loves. I mean, he has got he's an absolute rocket. When it comes to his legs, I've seen him, especially when App State took down A&M a couple years back. He really impressed me. He's a really fast guy. So that's really interesting. And also that offensive line, a lot of people had a lot of questions about it. It sounds really good. That sounds like an SEC offensive line that can keep up with the kind of offensive weapons we have. Membu you're right, very versatile guy. I mean, can pretty much play everywhere. A lot of people I think are going to be very interested in Caden Green. Bryant, the transition from SMU, American Athletic Conference ball to, SEC left tackle. That's a very tough transition. I would have to say that it's really hard to upgrade off of Javon Foster after last year and how good he was. So it's going to be very interesting. My next question for you, Quentin, is, a lot of people every year always excited to hear about the newcomers. Obviously a lot of high profile guys in the recruiting class like Lens Winery and guys like that. That people I'm sure are interested of, or people that they haven't heard of that they want to hear about. So who are the newcomers that have really stood out in fall camp that you can see potentially getting some high tier minutes this season and maybe starting this season,
So I'll start on the defensive side. Cam Keys, the freshman cornerback, has gotten a lot of praise from other players. The word I've and the rest of the reporters have been hearing a lot is physical. Cam Keys brings a lot of physicality to the cornerback room. And I think that was one of the biggest things that made Chris Abrams-Draine and Ennis Rakestraw so dangerous at the outside corner positions over their time in Columbia, was how physical they were. They were not afraid to get downhill in the run game. They were very, very good tacklers, especially Ennis Rakestraw. And in losing that, there were shoes to fill in that regard. Obviously, there's a lot more that goes into being a cornerback at the power 4 level than tackling really well. But it's very clear that Cam Keys has impressed a lot of his teammates, both veteran and young. And then another cornerback that's impressed so far during camp is Nick DeLoach, who has 1 year under his belts. And what has made me the most encouraged about the comments so far throughout fall camp, it doesn't sound like they are praising certain guys just to say it, just to fill time. They're using specifics. For example, Josh Manning, the sophomore wide receiver, he was talking about Nick DeLoach, and he was saying that last year he was very antsy. Looked like he was very anxious at cornerback, but now he's a lot more patient. Those specifics would have me very encouraged as a Mizzou football fan, because that's actually something that an opposing receiver noticed about a player that could offer a brighter future ahead. Which made me happy to hear. And so Keys and DeLoach in the cornerback room, I think are going to be impactful this year in a more reserve role. I think it's going to be Drayden Norwood, I think is the for sure cornerback number 1. It's sounded that for a long time. And then Toriano Pride on the other end, the transfer from Clemson, I believe is going to be the CB2. And then on the offensive side for young guys that have impressed, I'm going to go with Josh Manning. Very, very Theo Weesian, I believe I called it, and something I wrote a little while ago. But he's a very similar build, and he has similar jump ball skills. I think he could be a very dangerous red zone threat. And I think he could see a lot of early playing time, especially the first few games against Murray State and Buffalo, when Mizzou should, on paper, be up by a good bit in the second half. Under Eli Drinkwitz, that hasn't really been the case. It hasn't been the 73-point outing against Missouri State a bunch of years ago. It hasn't been a 79-0 sort of ordeal like it was against Delaware State a little while ago. These early games against FCS opponents and lower mid-major opponents and even lower power now 4 opponents, Mizzou hasn't really done a lot of blowing out. But at the same time, I do expect the reserves to play a good bit in the first couple of games. And Josh Manning has really been impressing throughout camp. He's also gotten some return reps. And so I think he could see more playing time than people might think.
Yeah, he had a great spring game too. He was a big standout the spring game. Same with Toriano Pride. So good to see them carrying that momentum, that sounds great. And speaking of the defensive side of the football, Obviously, new defensive coordinator, has had a lot of time to work with the guys. Coach Batoon, how do you think the defensive guys have adjusted to the system? I know from the first time I heard the guys talk about Batoon, they're really talking about how much attention to detail he puts to his job and the way he runs his defense and how simple it is to learn his system. So what do you think can piggyback off of that? How have they done so far adjusting? Have they said anything really about it?
Well, I think it's been a little bit easier, especially for the returners, because Blake Baker and Corey Batoon are very similar stylistically. They both want to get downhill. They both want to get for the quarterback, especially on third and longs. I mentioned yesterday in my notes, which you can find on Rocket Plus, if you are subscribed or not. I would highly encourage you to go there. That during yesterday's practice, where reporters were allowed to stay for the entirety of the practice. Previously, they had only been able to stay for about the first 45 minutes, periods 1 through 7. In the quote-unquote Prowler package, Eli Hoffa for the St. Louis Post-Dispatch did a really great job of explaining it. But it's basically subbing out in a traditional 4 defensive linemen, 2 linebackers, 5 defensive back scheme. You sub out a linebacker for a defensive back on third and long situations because you're obviously anticipating a pass. And the one linebacker, this is an example for how the guys, I think, are adjusting well. The one linebacker on the field was Khalil Jacobs, who worked with Corey Batoon at South Alabama for the past couple of years and is very familiar. I think he's a good person to have in that spot because he is similar to Tyron Hopper in that he has elite lateral movement skills. He can get downhill, and obviously he knows Batoon inside and out from a schematic standpoint. So I think the guys, they are familiar with that kind of scheme. It shouldn't be too different from last season. And they also have a lot of cornerbacks that we've mentioned this a couple of times now that are willing to tackle, that are willing to get downhill, that are willing to hit. And so I think it should be relatively seamless from Blake Baker. It's not anything too drastic. It's actually very similar stylistically. So I was encouraged by that, especially with how the players were talking about it.
Yeah, that's huge because obviously the defensive unit has to be the unit that has the most questions from Mizzou going into this year. A lot of, high tier college football analysts are talking about, that offense for Mizzou is pretty much a sure thing, fingers crossed. But the defense is really the thing that is going to determine whether this team can be a de facto playoff team or, could be that one team out in the poll at the beginning of the year that crashes out and just doesn't really, has a disappointing, expecting 11 wins, gets 8 or 7, So really excited to see the defense. But one thing that's a little bit of a downside with the defense is obviously the injury of Darius Smith. How big is that injury? Obviously gone for the whole year. Should Mizzou fans be worried about it? Or is it something that's just like, okay, we can move forward, we're fine?
Definitely not ideal. Darius Smith was set to have a large role in Corey Batoon's defense. And that's going to be a big loss. There's no other way to put it. But the silver lining for it is that Mizzou has a very deep defensive end room. Now, while Darius Smith, I believe, was set to play a joker role, which is basically a defensive end who could play in coverage, I believe Johnny Walker is going to take that mantle now. They have a lot of quality backup defensive ends that could fill that role. I think we could see more William Nwaneri than previously expected. I think he's still going to play a reserve role. Historically, it's been tough to get playing time in the SEC as a freshman defensive lineman, especially considering how good offensive linemen are in the SEC, especially. And Mizzou is going to be playing a lot of quality offensive linemen. But I think guys like Nwaneri, I think guys like Eddie Kelly, while he may not be as good in coverage, he's similar to Darius Robinson in that he's a tweener between defensive end and playing on the interior. But I think guys like him and Joe Moore III as well, I think can definitely pick up the slack. We saw Joe Moore in a reserve role last year. I thought he played pretty well in that. And so I don't think any panic buttons should be hit right now. Again, obviously a huge loss. Would love to enter a season as healthy as possible with all your guys healthy and ready to go. Yeah. But the good thing for Mizzou in wake of this obviously suboptimal situation is that they have guys that they can turn to that can fill that role.
Yeah. And, my last question for you today is going to be about the offensive line, just a more in-depth look. obviously we talked about who's going to start, who's going to do this. What do you think, with this offensive line and the team as a whole, what do you think the ceiling of this group is going to be? And what do you say at minimum this group should be doing?
I think they should be able to contend for the Joe Moore Award once again. We're semifinalists last season, and the two people that they're replacing, Javon Foster at left tackle and Xavier Delgado at left guard, they got arguably two of the best transfers in Marcus Bryant and Caden Green to fill those roles. And the other three guys, Connor Tolson at center, Cameron Johnson at right guard, Armand Membu at right tackle, are all back. And not like I have an experience playing offensive line myself, as I'm built more like Blake Craig and Marcus Bryant, I would say. A lot of offensive line success is about chemistry. You all have to be singing the same song and doing the same dance. You look at the great offensive lines of, I'll stay within Mizzou. Look at 2013, for example. All of those guys were not only very talented and very good at being offensive linemen, but they had played together for a really long time, and it showed. A lot of offensive line success is being able to communicate properly because you're facing a lot from opposing front sevens. So I think they got two very, very good replacements in Bryant and Green. In terms of chemistry, Bryant, he says he enjoys working with Caden Green a lot. And they've said they're going to run out once again. I anticipated that because they had so much success with it last year. And I don't think they should lose a step in that regard, despite the losses of Schrader, Foster, and Delgado. Marcus Bryant and Caden Green, I think, can absolutely are able to elevate to the second level and be able to block downfield and clear lanes for Nate Noel, Marcus Carroll, Jamal Roberts, Tavoris Jones, Kewan Lacey, whoever's carrying the ball on that side. I feel pretty confident that they can. I'm not sure if they can replicate the success of last year, but at the very least, I think they can get pretty close. And so I think it should be another really high quality year for the offensive line. Like Jim Harbaugh said in a I don't know if it was an interview or I believe he was at a conference sometime in March, but he's obviously a big offensive line guy. That's how he built Michigan during his time there. And that's how they found so much success was using the offensive line as the backbone of the offense. That's basically what he said at the conference is that that's who you're going to be reliant on. The success of the quarterback, the running back, and everybody else in the offense is going to be reliant on how sturdy the offensive line is. And I think Mizzou's got a pretty solid backbone with their offensive line, and with returning and every major contributor from the pass catcher room returning, along with two quality transfers in the backfield. I think the offense should be one of the best in college football like they were last season.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously Joe Moore contention is a huge ceiling, right? So really hope if that can happen. I mean, I don't see any reason why this team shouldn't go at least 11-1 or 10-2 at the very least. I think both those records should get this team a playoff spot. Maybe not 10-2, but 11-1 for sure. Realistically speaking, I really like what I'm hearing when it comes to the team. I think that Mizzou fans really like what they're hearing. I think that this year is going to be, fingers crossed, hopefully a banner year for this squad. I think there's a lot. It's a very hard thing to build off of how good last year was. With the expanded playoff, though, it is possible. And that's going to be a very interesting dynamic, seeing how much games mean now. Because typically a game between an 11th seed and a 15th seed, in week 10 or 11 really doesn't matter as much. Now that game is huge. That kind of game is massive, and it dictates whether you're going to be playing in late December. So, that's really all we got for today, Mr. Corpuel. Thank you so much for giving us, Mizzou faithful, the updates on what's going on. One last thing before we leave, guys, I want to make sure that you guys, follow all of RockM's socials down in the link in the description. We're going to have all that down there. And for you guys listening, it's at RockM Nation on Twitter. And as well, make sure to go check out the website and, to subscribe to RockM Plus. RockM Plus has been great. It gets you some nice discounts on some things like the magazine. For example, it's $15 for the magazine normally, $10 for monthly subscribers of RockM Nation, $5 for yearly subscribers of RockM Plus. So other than that, I think that should be it for all of us here today. Thank you so much for coming, Quentin. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
And this was great, and we're really excited for the season, guys. So we're gonna be dishing out some great content for you folks, and you guys have a good one. All right, bye, guys.
Thank you, everyone, for tuning in to Rock M Radio, a proud partner of Fans First Sports Network. Rock M Radio is the official podcast network of Rock M Plus, a new and exciting subscription service provided by me and the other voices of Rock M Radio. Please take a few moments to head over to rockm.plus and sign up for an account today. The cost is only $5 a month, and the benefits include access to our live podcast, a subscriber-only message board, weekly newsletters, and more. If you enjoyed this episode of Rock M Radio and would like to see more just like it beamed directly into your personal device, make sure to click the subscribe button below and tell your friends. Our podcast feed is available through the Apple Podcast app for iPhone, Google Podcast app for Android, whatever app you listen to your podcast. You can also find Rock M Radio on Spotify. If you're looking for a podcast about your favorite team that is not the Missouri Tigers, Fan First Sports Network is your answer. A full podcast network loaded with the team-specific podcasts covering Major League Baseball, the NFL, NHL, NBA, MLS, and more. We'll be back with more episodes of Rock M Radio coming to you soon.